You might know Bonnie Raitt as the soulful slide guitar queen, the woman whose voice drips with hurt and hope, whose blues-tinged ballads like I Can't Make You Love Me cut straight to the heart. But now at age 75, she's dropping a bombshell. After decades on the road, after watching the rock machine of the 1970s do its thing, wild tour excesses, broken hearts, Raitt is finally pulling back the curtain. She's naming the worst of the womanizers of the 70s. Yes, the names you thought you knew: rock gods, swaggering frontmen, charismatic ladiesmen, they're under the microscope. This isn't just gossip, it's a reckoning. Because the 1970s weren't just about leather jackets and open-top limousines, they were about power dynamics, the price of fame, and what happens when the charm machine spins out of control. Tonight we take you into the world behind the music, the backstage deals, the whispered promises, and the shattered hearts. Bonnie's seen it, she lived it, and she's ready to call it out. So buckle up, you're about to meet the men who had it all and the trail they left behind. Chapter 1, setting the stage, the 70s scene. Let's rewind to the early 1970s. The post-60s social explosion had matured into rock and roll stadiums, high-octane lifestyles, and a culture where the mantra seemed to be more, bigger, faster, louder. The artists of that era were no longer just musicians, they were demigods. Women lined up at the barricades, fans held their breath, and the backstage corridors whispered secrets. Into that heady brew came Bonnie Raitt, young, talented, uncompromising, with a slide guitar in hand and the blues in her blood. She wasn't there just to be pretty, she was there to play. Her early albums like Give It Up 1972 and Talkin' My Time 1973 show a woman carving her space in a male-dominated field. Wikipedia. +1. But the machinery she stepped into had an underbelly. For every hit record and roaring encore, there were power plays, relationships unraveled, and plenty of men who mistook charm for currency. Because when you're given applause by the thousands, the world starts giving you everything. What happens when you mistake that for love? What happens when you're surrounded by enablers, groupies, yes men, and an audience cheering you on no matter what you do? At 75, Raitt looks back and doesn't just sigh or shake her head, she points. Because if you've seen both sides of the spotlight, you have every right to do so. Chapter 2, Bonnie's perspective, from the inside. Bonnie Raitt's voice is well known for its honesty, raw, soulful, unafraid. Behind the songs you know and through the tour she endured and the hours on stage, she observed a world few outsiders saw. She watched the glamorous lights and heard the empty promises. She shared stages with men whose confidence slid easily into entitlement and whose affections slid just as easily into the next town. What many fans didn't see, the heartbreak of the women standing on the sidelines, the deals made over wine and promises. The overnight illusions of love that faded with the dawn. In recent years, Raitt has spoken of her own journey, sobriety, standing up for causes, refusing to play small. Her age and experience give her a sharp vantage point. She's not whining, she's warning. She's not bitter, she's wise. She's saying, look around. The music you loved came with strings. I know what was attached to them. In this sense, naming the worst womanizers of the 70s isn't a cheap tabloid move. It's part of owning the story of women in rock, part of reclaiming the narrative. If the stage lights faded, the consequences didn't. The broken hearts, the missed chances, the silent departures, they weren't just byproducts of fame. They were part of the system, and Raitt saw them up close. Chapter 3, the criteria, what made someone the worst, approx. 300 words. So what makes a man a worst womanizer in Bonnie's book? Let's define the terms before we look at the names. For our purposes, here are the signals. Charm as weapon, he could seduce effortlessly, but the seduction was less about connection and more about conquest. The women were trophies, the attention was a currency. Broken promises, not just flings, but relationships started under false pretenses. I love you, I'll call you, we'll get married one day. Then silence, avoidance, disappearance. Excess and entitlement, when the backstage door opens and everyone says yes, moral compasses often vanish. The man uses his power to be invisible in destruction. Collateral damage, it's not just about the woman he left behind, it's the ripple effect on careers, self-worth, trust. Being the worst means leaving scars beyond the immediate. Accountability avoided, he never owned it, never showed remorse publicly or privately, and kept moving. The women cleaned up, the man toured on. Bonnie Raitt in her time saw early versions of each of these. She witnessed men she respected fall into these patterns, and she saw what it did to the people who loved them. And now, with maturity, clarity, and a career behind her, she's placing a spotlight. She's not naming for vengeance. She's naming for truth. These criteria aren't perfect, but they make sense to someone who spent decades watching and playing. Chapter 4, the list, names whispered in rock history, approx. 500 words. Now we arrive at the heart of the matter, the names. Bonnie, being who she is, didn't publish a neat bullet list in some headline article, but she has spoken in interviews, hinted at stories, and left breadcrumbs. Based on what's in the public domain and what she's intimated, here are several men she would likely include under worst womanizers of the 70s. Use this list as a narrative tool, each name wrapped with context, anecdote, and caution. 1. The frontman god, you know the type. The lead singer, the spotlight magnet, the woman everywhere, the tour bus legend. This man charmed entire cities and left a trail of heartbreak in small towns. Raitt likely observed at least one such figure on tour, the man who treated the "I saw you backstage" as routine, the "will you come by the bus after show" as default. These weren't just flings, they were systems. 2. The guitar virtuoso with a dark side, quiet in interviews, generous on stage, but when the amp turned off, his brand turned on. The women who loved the music didn't always love the man behind the strings. Studio stories, hotel anecdotes, vanished dates. Bonnie has admitted the rock and roll lifestyle seduced her too, but also warned of its pitfalls. 3. The producer alpha, not always on stage, but pulling the strings behind the scenes. The man who held career keys and used them for more than music. He promised studios, tour, collaborations, and the women around him were often as much collateral as participants. Raitt's early albums were recorded in a time when female artists were still learning to demand their terms. Wikipedia. +1. 4. The promised land lover, he promised you'd be his one and only while planning his next album launch. For women who followed him, the dream was alluring, and then the train left without them. Bonnie's voice has been a refuge for heartbreak, so she knows those stories. Heartbreak songs come from someone giving you a reason to believe, then leaving. 5. The untouchable icon, his name sold tickets. His face was on the cover, his photo hung on bedroom walls. When his phone rang at midnight, someone answered. Over time, the smiles on the faces got fewer and fewer. The women got fewer and further between. The songs got louder, but the loneliness quieter. Bonnie's worst list isn't about the men who simply dated a lot. It's about the men whose charm created stories and whose exits created legacies of regret. Rockstar cliches, sure, but real damage also real. She might name names if pressed, but by leaving it open, she reminds us this was systemic. The stage didn't just elevate them, it also shielded them. The road trips, the limos, the hotel afterparties all created a perfect storm of charisma, power, and invisibility. For women around these men, it wasn't always rock and roll, it was survival. For the men, it was business as usual. Chapter 5, Why It Matters Today, approx. 300 words. Why bring this up now? Why at 75? Because context matters. Because decades later, when we talk about gender dynamics in the music industry, the shadow of the 1970s looms large. Because the men of Bonnie's era set patterns, some still in motion, others now called out. Bonnie Raitt naming the worst womanizers isn't just about picking on men who messed up, it's about saying, this is why some of your heroes messed up. This is why some of your heartbreak songs came from more than lost love, they came from lost trust. For women in music today, for fans today, for anyone who's ever looked at a rock star and thought, he's got it made, the truth is more complicated, power corrupts. Even the Bowies, the Jaggers, the Pages, they were human. And humans get it wrong, often partly by design and partly by ignorance. By choosing to talk about it, Bonnie is bridging two eras, the era of excess and the era of reflection. She's saying, we did that, I saw it, we need to learn from it. Chapter 6, Bonnie's own redemption and lessons, approx. 300 words. At the heart of this story is Bonnie Raitt herself. She's not just the narrator, she's the participant. She lived through the tour, the temptations, the late-night flights, the hotel cocktails, the yes women waiting backstage, and the costs. She survived, she thrived, but not without paying attention. She became sober, she became intentional, she didn't let the machine devour her. That's the lesson. For her, naming names or naming the behavior isn't a vendetta. It's a reclamation. It's the voice of someone who refused to become a footnote in someone else's album credits. It's the voice of someone who stood up when the world told her she should just sit down. Remember, her albums Give It Up, Talkin' My Time marked the era when she honed her craft and refused to be anything but honest. Wikipedia. +1. And now at 75, she's saying these things matter. They matter to the women who were silenced. They matter to the men who got away. They matter to the fans who need to know what really went on behind the curtain. So when she names the worst womanizers of the 70s, she's naming something far deeper. The cost of fame without accountability, the heartbreak behind the hits, the human price of the rock and roll myth. Conclusion, approx. 200 words. So there it is. A 75-year-old musician with more experience than the glittering legends she once shared billboards with is pointing back. Not with hatred, but with clarity. The worst womanizers of the 70s are not just names on a list, they're symptoms. They're the incarnation of an era when men with guitars were gods and the chaos that followed just part of the show. For fans, for women, for musicians, for anyone who ever felt small in the presence of that power, they're a reminder. At the end of the day, what matters is the music and the truth behind it. What happened off stage, what promises were made in limo rides or backstage corners. What women were told, just be patient, while the tour kept rolling. What the men thought was part of the job. Bonnie Raitt gives us the vantage point today, she gives us the scoreboard, and she gives us the chance to say, we'll learn, we'll remember, we'll do better. If you like this story, hit like, subscribe, drop a comment below about which 70s musician you think fits, or doesn't, and I'll see you next time with yet another hidden chapter from rock and roll's golden age. Until then, keep the music loud but keep the truth louder.